What if I told you that the moment you think you have lost everything could be the exact moment you are about to win? Brandon Hayes pushed open the door of his luxury penthouse at 5:17 in the morning, still wearing his mistress's perfume like a badge of honor. He expected to find his exhausted wife Emily on the couch, too broken to even question where he had been. But instead, he found something that made his blood run cold. Silence. Empty rooms,
Don't worry,
and a
the judge is
USB
clearly
drive
siding with
sitting on the
us.
kitchen counter with a note that
You're
said
almost
just
free.
4 words. I know everything, Brandon. For 2 years, this powerful executive had been playing a calculated game, marrying an innocent nurse just to boost his corporate image, planning to take her baby and destroy her reputation, documenting her every weakness to prove she was mentally unstable. He thought he was always 10 steps ahead. He thought she was too naive, too trusting, too broken to fight back. But what Brandon did not know was that Emily had been recording too. Every lie, every forged document, every cruel word, and she was not alone anymore. She had found allies he never saw coming. This is the true story of how an ordinary woman took down a monster who thought he was untouchable. A story about betrayal, survival, and the devastating power of evidence. Because sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one who destroys you completely. So if you have ever felt trapped, if you have ever been told you were crazy when you knew the truth, if you have ever wondered if escape is possible, this story is for you. Stay until the end, because what Emily did next changed everything. And if this story resonates with you, or if you know someone who needs to hear it, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and share this with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe to our channel because we tell the stories that matter. The stories about people who refuse to stay victims. The stories that prove you are stronger than you know. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Brandon Hayes pushed open the door of his Upper West Side penthouse at 17 minutes past 5 in the morning. His $3,000 suit was wrinkled, his tie hung loose around his neck, and the unmistakable scent of Chanel No. 5, his Mistress Sloane's signature perfume, clung to every fiber of his clothing. He expected the usual scene. His exhausted wife Emily would be slumped on the leather couch, their 6-week-old son pressed against her chest, dark circles carved deep beneath her eyes. She would be too tired to question where he had been, too worn down to fight anymore. But the apartment was silent, not the peaceful silence of sleeping occupants. This was the hollow silence of abandonment. Brandon frowned, stepping deeper into the living room. The baby's bassinet that normally sat beside the couch was gone. The diaper bag that always hung by the front door had vanished. The shelf of neatly folded receiving blankets stood empty. "Emily?" His voice cracked slightly. No answer came. He moved faster now, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. The nursery door stood open. Brandon rushed inside and froze. The crib was stripped completely bare. No sheets, no mobile hanging overhead, no tiny clothes in the dresser drawers, just empty drawers gaping open like mouths frozen in silent screams. His heart began hammering against his ribs. He raced to the bedroom, flinging open the closet door. Her side was half empty, not completely cleaned out, just the essentials missing. The toiletries she used every day had disappeared from the bathroom counter. This was not the panicked flight of someone running on impulse. This was the careful selection of someone who had planned every detail. Brandon stumbled backward, panic clawing up his throat. He made his way to the kitchen, and that was when he saw it. On the marble island sat 3 items, arranged with deliberate precision. A single USB drive, his house keys, the ones he had given her when they married, and a folded piece of paper. His hands trembled as he unfolded the note. The handwriting was Emily's, but the tone was something he had never heard from her before. Steady, clear, final. "Brandon, by the time you read this, we are gone. I know everything. Every late eye, every night away, every document you forged with my signature. You will not find us. Do not try. My attorney will contact you. Emily." The paper slipped from his fingers and drifted to the floor. Gone? Where could she possibly go? She had no money. He had made absolutely certain of that. No family nearby. Her parents had died 3 years ago in a car accident. No home except this one, and the penthouse was in his name only. Then his eyes caught something that made his blood turn to ice. The security camera in the corner of the room. The tiny red light was blinking. Slow, steady, recording. With shaking hands, Brandon grabbed the USB drive and stumbled to his laptop on the dining table. He jabbed it into the port, his fingers clumsy with rising dread. The drive opened to reveal 4 folders. He clicked on the first one. Photos and messages. Screenshots filled the screen. His text messages with Sloan. Hundreds of them. The timestamps went back 2 years, long before Emily had any reason to suspect. His stomach dropped. The second folder was labeled Financial Documents. Inside was the prenuptial agreement he had tricked Emily into signing when she was 7 months pregnant, telling her it was just a tax form. The forged documents that bore her signature but that she had never actually signed. His secret bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. Brandon's vision began to blur at the edges. The third folder contained video files. He clicked on one at random, security camera footage from their living room. The timestamp read 2:17 in the morning from 3 weeks ago. On screen, Brandon staggered through the front door, clearly drunk. Emily sat on the couch with their newborn son Caleb pressed against her chest. She looked up at him with hollow eyes. "Where were you?" her recorded voice asked, barely above a whisper. "None of your damn business," his own voice snarled back. "Stop being so needy." The video showed him shoving past her, so close that she had to pull the baby protectively away. Brandon watched his recorded self disappear down the hallway without even glancing at his son. There were dozens more videos, each one worse than the last. The fourth folder was labeled Audio Recordings. Brandon clicked on the first file with a sense of doom settling over him like a shroud. His own voice came through the laptop speakers, crystal clear. "She is too stupid to notice. Once the custody paperwork goes through, she will have nothing. The baby stays with me." Sloane's laugh followed. "I cannot wait to be the only Mrs. Hayes." Brandon's $500 whiskey glass slipped from his grip and shattered against the marble floor, sending amber liquid and glass shards spraying across the pristine white surface. "What did you do, Emily?" he whispered to the empty apartment. Then he noticed the date stamps on the video files. She had been recording for 4 months, since before the baby was even born. While he thought he was the one in control, carefully building his case against her, documenting her supposed instability, she had been 10 steps ahead the entire time. Everything he thought he controlled, his wife, his secret, his perfect plan, it was all gone. And she had been the one pulling the strings from the very beginning. Brandon sank to his knees on the kitchen floor, surrounded by broken glass and broken plans. For the first time in his privileged, powerful life, he understood what it felt like to lose completely. The security camera's red light continued to blink in the corner, recording every moment of his destruction. 3 years earlier, none of this had seemed possible. Brandon Hayes had his life mapped out with the precision of a military campaign. At 34 years old, he was the vice president of acquisitions at Hayes Thornton Biotech, positioned perfectly for the $500 million initial public offering that would make him one of the wealthiest men in Manhattan. There was only one problem. The board of directors had made it painfully clear that his personal life was holding him back. "You are brilliant, Brandon," the chairman had told him over scotch at the Harvard Club. "But you come across as cold, unstable. We need to see you as a family man before we go public. The investors want stability. Get married. Soon." Brandon had been seeing Sloan Whitmore for 18 months by then. She was perfect in many ways. Beautiful, sophisticated, from the right family. But Sloan was also calculating and independent, the type of woman who would demand a prenuptial agreement in her own career. The type who would never play the supportive wife for the benefit of his corporate image. He needed someone different, someone manageable. That was when Emily Morgan had walked into his life. It was 2:37 in the morning on a Tuesday in March. Brandon had been rear-ended at a red light on his way home from a late dinner with Sloan. Nothing serious, just a cut on his forehead that needed stitches. The ambulance had brought him to Manhattan Presbyterian Hospital. The trauma nurse who treated him was exactly what he had been looking for, even if he had not realized it yet. Emily Morgan was 28 years old with kind eyes and gentle hands. She worked efficiently, cleaning his wound while making small talk to keep him calm. She asked about his work, listened attentively when he talked about the biotech industry, and laughed at his jokes even though he could tell she was exhausted from a long shift. "You are very good at this," Brandon had said, studying her. No wedding ring, no expensive jewelry, scrubs that had seen better days. Thank you, Emily had replied with a tired smile. 12-hour shifts give you a lot of practice. When he asked for her number, she had politely declined. Hospital policy, she explained. But Brandon Hayes had never been good at accepting no for an answer. The next day, he returned to the hospital with a massive bouquet of roses and a check for $10,000 made out to the Manhattan Presbyterian Hospital Emergency Department. In honor of the amazing care I received, he told Emily's supervisor, making sure Emily could overhear. Her supervisor had been thrilled. That donation will fund our supply closet for a month. Emily, you should definitely accept his dinner invitation. He is clearly a gentleman. Emily had hesitated, but Brandon could see her resolve weakening. He pressed his advantage, suggesting a restaurant he knew would impress her, somewhere she could never afford on a nurse's salary. Their first date had been at Le Bernardin, overlooking Central Park. Brandon had been attentive and charming, asking questions about her life, pretending to care about the answers. Emily had told him about growing up in a small Pennsylvania town, about losing both parents in a car accident 3 years earlier, about working double shifts to pay off her nursing school loans. Perfect, Brandon had thought. No family to interfere, no money of her own, alone in the world. She was exactly what he needed. He had moved quickly after that. Within 2 weeks, he told her he loved her. Emily had hesitated, clearly overwhelmed by the speed of everything, but she set it back. Within a month, he introduced her to his business partners at a company dinner, though notably, he never mentioned her to his mother or his sister. By the end of their second month together, Brandon took Emily to the Hamptons for a weekend getaway. They walked along the beach at sunset, and he dropped to one knee in the sand. Emily Morgan, he said, pulling out a ring he had bought that afternoon, nothing too expensive but impressive enough. Will you marry me? Emily had stared at the ring, tears filling her eyes. Brandon, this is so fast. Are you sure? I have never been more sure of anything, he lied smoothly. Why waste time when I know you are the one? She had said yes. They were married 3 months later at City Hall. Brandon had insisted on keeping it small. Let's not waste money on a big wedding, he told her. We can use that money for our future together. What he did not tell her was that a quiet City Hall wedding meant fewer witnesses. Fewer people who might later testify that they had seemed like a real couple in love. The warning signs had been there from the beginning, though Emily had been too trusting to see them. Brandon never introduced her to his mother. He was oddly controlling about money, insisting on managing all their finances himself. He worked late constantly, 3 or 4 nights every week. His phone was always face down on the table. Sometimes he came home smelling faintly of floral perfume that was not hers. But Emily had ignored every red flag. She was lonely after losing her parents. Brandon made her feel safe and financially secure. She wanted so desperately to believe in the fairy tale that she convinced herself every doubt was just paranoia. And Brandon had counted on exactly that 3 months into their marriage. On a cold December morning, Emily stood in their penthouse bathroom, staring at a pregnancy test. 2 pink lines. Positive. She waited until Brandon came home that evening, barely able to contain her excitement. When he walked through the door at 9:30, later than usual, she practically ran to him. Brandon, I have something to tell you, she said, her voice trembling with joy. He looked up from his phone, distracted. What is it? I am pregnant. For just a fraction of a second, Brandon's face tightened in what looked almost like panic. Then he forced his features into a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. That is great, honey, he said, his voice carefully neutral. We will make it work. Make it work. Not I am thrilled or this is wonderful or any of the responses Emily had imagined. Just make it work, as if the baby was a problem to be managed rather than a blessing to celebrate. A cold knot formed in Emily's stomach, but she pushed it down. Pregnancy hormones, she told herself. She was being too sensitive. But over the following months, as Emily's belly grew, Brandon's behavior changed dramatically. And there was nothing hormonal about what she was seeing. In the first 2 months, Brandon suggested repeatedly that Emily should quit her job. Stress is not good for the baby, he said over breakfast one Saturday morning. I love my work, Emily protested, and we need my income. We do not need your income, Brandon replied, his voice tight. I make more than enough for both of us. When Emily refused, Brandon sulked for 3 days, barely speaking to her. By months 3 and 4 of her pregnancy, Brandon started working even later. Now it was 5 or 6 nights each week that he did not come home until 11 at night or midnight. Emily would sit at their dining table alone, one hand resting on her growing belly, feeling the baby kick while she ate dinner by herself. She tried calling him during those late nights. He rarely answered. When he did, his responses were clipped. "I am in a meeting. I cannot talk. This is important for my career, Emily. Can you please support me? I will be home when I am done. Stop checking up on me." The loneliness was crushing. Emily would lie in bed at night, feeling her baby move, wishing she had someone to share these moments with. The man who had promised to build a life with her was disappearing, one late night at a time. By months 5 and 6, Brandon stopped attending doctor appointments altogether. Emily went alone to hear the heartbeat, alone to see the ultrasound images of their son's tiny fingers and toes. When she tried to show Brandon the sonogram photos, he would glance at them for perhaps 2 seconds before his eyes drifted back to his phone. "That is nice, babe," he would say, his tone suggesting it was anything but nice. During months 7 and 8, the verbal abuse began in earnest. Emily was exhausted all the time now, her back aching, her feet swollen. Simple tasks like doing laundry or preparing dinner felt monumental. One evening, she started crying while trying to fold clothes, overwhelmed by exhaustion and hormones. Brandon walked through the living room and stopped, staring at her with undisguised contempt. "You are getting emotional about nothing," he said coldly. "I am just tired," Emily replied, wiping her eyes. "You are home all day. How tired can you possibly be?" "I am growing a human being, Brandon. Your son. Stop being so needy. I am building a future for us. Why cannot you support that?" Emily had started crying herself to sleep most nights by then. She called the hospital's mental health line one evening, asking if this level of sadness was normal pregnancy depression. The counselor had been gentle but firm. "What you are describing sounds less like depression and more like an unhealthy relationship dynamic. Do you feel safe at home?" Emily had hung up without answering. What Brandon did not tell his wife during those 8 months was that his carefully planned timeline had fallen apart. The initial public offering had been delayed. The board wanted more proof of stability. Brandon was stuck in a marriage he had only entered for business reasons. With a baby he had never wanted and no clear end date in sight, Sloan was growing impatient too. "When are you going to leave her?" she demanded during their Wednesday night meetings at her apartment. "Soon," Brandon promised. "The lawyers are drafting the custody paperwork. Once we prove she is unstable, I get the baby, she gets supervised visits, and then she is out of my life. And then I can finally be Mrs. Hayes?" "And then you can finally be Mrs. Hayes," Brandon confirmed, pulling her close. He had already consulted with 3 different attorneys about how to weaponize Emily's exhaustion and emotional state, document everything they had advised. Every tear, every moment of overwhelm, every sign that she might not be fit to parent alone. Build a case that she is mentally unstable and the courts will give you exactly what you want. So Brandon took mental notes. Every time Emily cried, he filed it away. Every time she seemed overwhelmed, he noted it. Every time she asked him for help or support, he reframed it in his mind as evidence of her inability to cope. He was building his trap carefully. He just did not know that Emily was building one of her own. In October, when Emily was 8 months pregnant, Brandon insisted she attend his company's fundraiser gala at the Plaza Hotel. "It is important for my career," he said. "You need to be there." Emily did not want to go. Her back ached constantly now. Her feet were so swollen she could barely fit into shoes. She was exhausted and uncomfortable and wanted nothing more than to stay home. But she agreed, still desperately trying to be the supportive wife Brandon claimed he needed. She wore a simple navy maternity dress that cost $89 from a maternity store, all she could afford since Brandon controlled their finances so tightly. She pulled her hair back into a simple bun. She wore no jewelry because Brandon had never bought her any, despite his wealth. When they arrived at the plaza, Emily felt immediately out of place. Every other woman wore designer gowns and dripped with diamonds. She looked like exactly what she was, a working-class girl who did not belong in this world. Brandon kissed her cheek distractedly and disappeared into the crowd of executives within minutes of their arrival. Emily stood alone by the hors d'oeuvres table, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, feeling invisible. That was when she saw her. Sloane Whitmore glided across the ballroom like she owned it. Tall and elegant, with blonde hair curled perfectly around her shoulders, she wore a backless, crimson gown that probably cost more than Emily's car. A Cartier diamond necklace glittered at her throat, the same necklace Emily had admired in a magazine 2 months ago. The one Brandon had said was too expensive. Maybe next year. Emily watched as Brandon's entire demeanor transformed the moment he spotted Sloane. His posture straightened. His expression, which had been bored and distant, suddenly came alive with genuine warmth. He walked towards Sloane with an eagerness Emily had not seen from him in months. When Sloane turned and saw him, her face lit up with unmistakable affection. They leaned in close, far too close for colleagues, and Sloane whispered something that made Brandon laugh. Really laugh, the way he used to laugh with Emily before the pregnancy, before everything changed. Emily felt something crack inside her chest. She tried to tell herself it meant nothing. They were colleagues, business partners. She was being paranoid. But then Sloane's hand came to rest on Brandon's lower back. It was a small gesture, casual and familiar. The gesture of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. Emily's throat tightened. Her hand instinctively went to her belly, protective and worried. She needed to leave. She needed air. She needed to not watch her husband with another woman. She made her way to the bathroom on unsteady feet. Inside, she gripped the edge of the marble sink, trying to steady her breathing. That was when the bathroom door opened behind her. Emily looked up into the mirror and found herself staring at Sloane Whitmore's reflection. Their eyes met in the glass. Sloane's smile was polite on the surface, but her eyes were calculating, assessing every flaw. The cheap dress, the tired eyes, the swollen ankles in sensible shoes. "You must be Emily," Sloane said, her voice honey-sweet. "Brandon has told me so much about you." Emily forced herself to turn around to face this woman directly. "All good things, I hope." Sloane's smile sharpened just slightly. "Of course, he is very protective of you, especially now." Her gaze dropped deliberately to Emily's pregnant belly before rising back to her face. Pregnancy can be so hard on a woman. The way she said it was not sympathetic. It was pitying, almost condescending. "I am managing just fine," Emily said, hating how small her voice sounded. Sloane leaned against the counter, examining her perfectly manicured nails. $200 manicure, Emily thought. Maybe more. "You know, Brandon works so hard," Sloane continued, her tone conversational. "He needs someone who can keep up with his lifestyle. All those late nights, business dinners, networking events." She looked up, her eyes meeting Emily's with something that might have been sympathy or might have been cruelty. "It must be difficult for you, being pregnant, stuck at home, while he is out building his empire." Emily's hands gripped the edge of the sink behind her. "He is building a future for our family." Sloane's smile turned almost sad. "Is that what he told you?" Before Emily could respond, before she could process what that question implied, Sloane straightened and smoothed down her expensive gown. "Well, I should get back," she said lightly. "Brandon hates when I am gone too long." She paused at the door, glancing back over her shoulder. "Oh, and Emily, that necklace you were admiring." She touched the Cartier diamonds at her throat. "Brandon has excellent taste, does he not?" Then she was gone, leaving Emily alone in the bathroom with a pounding heart and trembling hands. Emily returned to the ballroom, but she could not stay. She felt physically sick, not from the pregnancy, but from knowing. Deep down in a place she had been trying desperately to ignore, she knew exactly what was happening. She pulled out her phone and texted Brandon with shaking fingers. "Not feeling well. Going home." He did not respond. She called an Uber, not willing to wait for Brandon to finish whatever he was doing with Sloane. As the car pulled away from the plaza, Emily looked back through the rear window. Through the tall windows of the ballroom, she could see Brandon and Sloane slow dancing. His hand was on her waist. Her head rested against his shoulder. They moved together like they had done this 100 times before. The image burned itself into Emily's memory with the searing permanence of a brand. In the back of the Uber, as Manhattan's lights blurred past the window, Emily felt a sudden, sharp pain low in her abdomen. She looked down. The seat beneath her was wet. Her water had broken. Emily called Brandon 14 times from the back of the Uber as the driver raced toward Manhattan Presbyterian Hospital. Every call went straight to voicemail. She tried the hospital paging system using the emergency contact number Brandon had provided. No response. By the time the Uber pulled up to the emergency entrance at 3:47 in the morning, Emily was crying from pain and fear, in the devastating loneliness of facing this moment completely alone. The nurses who rushed out with a wheelchair took one look at her face and understood this was about more than physical pain. "Where is your husband?" one of them asked gently as they wheeled Emily through the automatic doors. "He is not answering his phone," Emily managed through gritted teeth as another contraction hit. The nurses exchanged a look that Emily would remember forever. It was a look that said they had seen this before, seen husbands who did not show up, seen women giving birth alone. The baby was breech. Emily needed an emergency cesarean section. As the surgical team prepped her, as they placed the epidural needle in her spine, as they draped the blue surgical curtain across her chest, Emily kept asking the same question. Did anyone reach my husband? Is he coming? No one could give her an answer. Emily gave birth to her son at 4:52 in the morning, 6 pounds, 2 ounces, premature by 3 weeks. He needed oxygen immediately. The nurses whisked him away to the NICU before Emily could even hold him. She lay on the operating table, being stitched back together, tears sliding silently down her temples into her hair. Her son was fighting to breathe in another room. Her husband was somewhere in Manhattan, not answering his phone. She had never felt more alone in her entire life. Brandon finally showed up at 11:30 in the morning, almost 7 hours after his son was born. His hair was messy, his suit was wrinkled. He smelled like perfume and alcohol and Sloan. Emily knew that smell by now. She had been smelling it on him for months, but never had it been so obvious, so undeniable, so cruel as it was in this moment. The first words out of Brandon's mouth were not, "Are you okay?" or "How is the baby?" They were, "Jesus, Emily, why did you not wait? You scared the hell out of me. I thought you could hold on until I got back from the meeting." Emily stared at him from her hospital bed. She had nearly died on that operating table. Their son was in the NICU with tubes helping him breathe, and Brandon's first reaction was annoyance. "Meeting?" Her voice was hoarse from screaming during labor. "You did not answer 14 calls. What meeting lasts all night?" Brandon's jaw tightened. "Do not start with the accusations. I am here now, am I not?" The nurse who had been checking Emily's vitals gave Brandon a look of pure disgust and left the room without a word. Emily closed her eyes. A single tear slid down her cheek. In that moment, lying in a hospital bed, her body torn apart from giving birth, her son fighting for his life down the hall, her husband smelling like another woman, Emily finally understood the truth she had been avoiding for months. She had not married a man who would grow to love her. She had married a monster. And now she was trapped with his child. Their son, Caleb, spent 3 weeks in the NICU. Emily was there every single day, from 8 in the morning until 8 at night. She sat beside his incubator, her hand pressed against the warm plastic, singing lullabies through tears. She pumped breast milk every 3 hours. She learned to change his tiny diaper around the feeding tubes. She memorized every beep of every monitor. Brandon visited twice during those 3 weeks. The first visit lasted 15 minutes. He took a photo of himself standing beside the incubator, posted it to Instagram with the caption, "Proud Dad, #blessed," and left. The second visit lasted 10 minutes. Caleb started crying, the high-pitched wail of a premature infant, and Brandon's face tightened with irritation. He never came back. The NICU nurses noticed. They whispered when they thought Emily could not hear them. One nurse, an older woman named Patricia with kind eyes and 20 years of experience, pulled Emily aside one afternoon. "Honey," Patricia said quietly, "I have been doing this for a long time. I have seen this situation before. You need to start documenting everything." Emily looked at her blankly. "Documenting what?" "Your husband's absence, his lack of support. If he is not here now when your baby needs him most, he will not be there later either. And when custody battles start, you will need proof." Emily had not understood then. She was too exhausted, too overwhelmed, too deep in survival mode to process what Patricia was really telling her. But that night, in a small notebook she kept in her purse, Emily started writing. November 4th, Brandon visited for 15 minutes, took a photo, left immediately. November 7th, Brandon did not come, said he had a work dinner. November 11th, asked Brandon to bring the breast pump from home. He forgot. She did not know yet that this notebook would help save her life. She was just following the advice of a nurse who cared. When Caleb was finally cleared to come home, Emily was terrified. She had never been alone with a baby before. Her body was still healing from the cesarean section. She had no family to help, no friends left after months of isolation, no idea what she was doing. Brandon carried the car seat into the apartment, set it down in the middle of the living room and said, "You have got this. I need to get back to the office." It was 2 in the afternoon on a Saturday. Emily stood in the center of their penthouse holding her 5-pound baby and realized with devastating clarity that she was completely, utterly alone. The next 3 months were a descent into a hell Emily had not known existed. Caleb needed to eat every 90 minutes because he was premature. Emily was up all night, every night. Brandon slept in the guest room, claiming he needed rest for work. By week 4, Emily had slept a total of maybe 40 hours. She started hallucinating from exhaustion, seeing shadows move in her peripheral vision, hearing phantom crying even when Caleb was quiet. By week 8, Emily's doctor diagnosed her with postpartum depression. She cried while feeding Caleb, whispering, "I am sorry I am not good enough," to her baby who did not understand. She stopped showering because there was no time. She stopped eating because she was too tired. Her weight dropped from 145 pounds before pregnancy to 102 pounds. By week 12, Brandon's verbal abuse had become calculated and constant. Emily burned dinner one night after falling asleep while holding the baby. She woke to the smoke alarm blaring. Brandon came home to chaos. "Are you trying to burn down the apartment?" he shouted. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "I'm sorry, I just fell asleep for a second. I am so tired." "You are home all day. How hard is it to make one meal?" He ordered takeout, ate it in his office, and slammed the door. Another night, Emily asked Brandon to watch Caleb for 1 hour so she could take a shower. Brandon agreed. When Emily returned, she found Caleb screaming in his bassinet, diaper unchanged, while Brandon played video games with headphones on. "You could not hear him crying?" Emily asked, picking up her sobbing baby. "He is fine. Stop helicoptering. He has been screaming for 20 minutes. Maybe if you were a better mother, he would not cry so much." The words hit Emily like a physical blow. But the worst incident happened when Emily confronted Brandon about an $800 charge on their credit card. Dinner at Aurelie, the restaurant where he had proposed to her. The date was 3 nights earlier, when he claimed he was working late on budget revisions. "Were you at Aurelie last night?" Emily asked, her voice shaking. Brandon's face went cold. "Do not question me about where I go." "But you said you were working." "I said, do not question me." He shoved her, not hard enough to knock her down, but hard enough to make her stumble backward and grab the kitchen counter for balance. Emily gasped, one hand flying to her chest. Brandon looked almost surprised at himself for a split second. Then his expression hardened. "Look what you made me do," he said coldly. "If you were not so paranoid all the time." Emily grabbed Caleb from his bouncer seat and locked herself in the bathroom. She sat on the floor, baby clutched to her chest, and sobbed as quietly as she could. Through the door, she could hear Brandon's voice, calm now, almost reasonable. "You are being dramatic, Emily. I barely touched you. You are too sensitive. The pregnancy messed with your head. Maybe you need to see a psychiatrist." With shaking hands, Emily pulled out her phone. She opened the voice memo app, and she pressed record. For the next hour, she recorded every word Brandon said through the bathroom door. Every gaslighting statement, every blame shift, every cruel manipulation. When she finally emerged, exhausted and red-eyed, Brandon was on the couch watching television as if nothing had happened. Emily went to her laptop. She created a new email account using her maiden name, morgan.emily.1994@gmail.com, an account Brandon did not know existed. She uploaded the audio file. She labeled it Evidence 1. She did not have a plan yet. She did not know what she would do with this recording. She just knew, with the bone-deep certainty of a drowning woman grabbing for any floating debris, that she needed to document what was happening to her. Because if she did not, no one would ever believe her. It was a Tuesday afternoon in February. Caleb was 4 months old. Emily had not slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since he was born. She collapsed on the couch at 2:47, too exhausted to even close her eyes properly. Caleb was finally napping. The apartment was quiet. For the first time in days, Emily had a moment to simply breathe. That was when she noticed Brandon's laptop sitting open on the coffee table. He never left it open. Never. He carried that laptop everywhere, password protected, guarded like it contained nuclear launch codes. Emily stared at it. She should not look. She knew she should not look. But a notification popped up on the screen. Impossible to ignore. iMessage from SWW. Miss you already. Last night was perfect. Same time Friday? Emily's heart stopped beating. Her hands shook as she reached for the trackpad. The message thread opened before she could change her mind. SWBW, Sloan Whitmore Whitfield. Emily would Google the full name later and find Sloane's perfect LinkedIn profile, her perfect Instagram feed, her perfect life. The messages went back months, years. Cannot wait to have you all to myself this weekend. Tell the wife you have another conference. Already done. Booked us the penthouse suite at the Mandarin. When are you going to leave her? Soon. The lawyers are drafting the custody paperwork. Once we prove she is unstable, I get Caleb, she gets supervised visits. Then she is out. Good. I am tired of being the secret. I want to be Mrs. Hayes. Emily's vision blurred. She kept scrolling, her breath coming in short gasps. There were hundreds of messages. Thousands, maybe? October 2020, 5 months before Brandon met Emily at the hospital. I know we agreed to wait until after the IPO, but Brandon, I love you. March 2021, the week Brandon met Emily. Board wants me married before IPO found the perfect candidate, sweet, naive, no family to interfere. This will be easy. June 2021, the week Brandon proposed. Proposing to the nurse today. Do not worry, baby, it is just for show. You are the one I love. Emily ran to the kitchen sink and vomited. Her whole body shook with the violence of it. When she was done, she gripped the edge of the counter, gasping for air. She had not been wrong. She had not been paranoid. Every instinct she had ignored, every red flag she had explained away, every moment of doubt she had pushed down, it had all been real. Brandon had never loved her. He had married her as a business transaction. The pregnancy, the baby, the wedding vows. It had all been a lie from the very beginning. Emily wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and returned to the laptop. She needed to see everything. She needed to know the full extent of what she was dealing with. She opened Brandon's files. In a folder labeled E-Custody Strategy, she found documents that made her blood run cold. A prenuptial agreement she had signed at 7 months pregnant. Brandon had told her it was just a tax form that needed her signature. But the actual document stripped her of all marital assets and limited her alimony to $1,500 per month for only 2 years. A psychological evaluation claiming Emily had severe postpartum psychosis and was a danger to herself and the child. She had never seen this doctor. The entire evaluation was forged. A draft custody petition seeking full legal and physical custody of Caleb, with Emily allowed only 4 hours per week of supervised visitation. An email to Brandon's attorney dated 3 weeks ago. Need this filed within 60 days. She is already showing signs of breakdown. We can use that. Every time Brandon had called her too emotional, he had been building a legal case. Every time he had undermined her confidence, he had been creating evidence of her supposed instability. Every tear she had cried, every moment of overwhelm, every desperate plea for help, he had been cataloging it all to use against her. Emily sat on the floor of their living room, laptop open beside her, and had a full panic attack. She could not breathe. The room spun. Black spots appeared at the edges of her vision. She was trapped. No money, no family, no friends, no gym, no home that was legally hers. If she left, Brandon would claim she abandoned Caleb. If she stayed, Brandon would destroy her piece by piece until she really was as unstable as he claimed, and then he would take Caleb anyway. She was in checkmate, and she had not even realized she was playing a game. From the nursery, Caleb started crying. Emily crawled to his room on her hands and knees, picked him up, and whispered through her tears, "I am so sorry, baby. Mommy is trapped. I do not know how to save us." But then, through the fog of despair, a single thought crystallized. If Brandon had been documenting against her, she could document against him. Emily grabbed her phone. She opened the laptop camera and photographed everything, every message, every forged document, every piece of Brandon's plan to destroy her. She uploaded all of it to her secret email account, the one Brandon did not know existed. morgan.emily.1994@gmail.com. She did not have a plan yet, but now she had evidence, and evidence was power. That night, when Brandon came home at 11:30, Emily was feeding Caleb in the dimly lit nursery. Brandon glanced in, said nothing, and went straight to their bedroom. Emily watched him go, her face carefully blank. For the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. She felt rage, cold, clear, focusing. Brandon thought he was 10 steps ahead, but Emily had just learned the rules of the game he had been playing in all along, and she was going to beat him at it. 2 weeks later, Emily brought Caleb to Manhattan Presbyterian for his 5-month checkup. The pediatrician, Dr. Olivia Hart, was a woman in her mid-50s with warm brown eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Dr. Hart was going through the standard checkup routine when she paused, frowning slightly. She looked at Emily more carefully. "How are you doing, Emily?" Dr. Hart asked, her tone gentler than before. "Fine," Emily said automatically. "Just tired." Dr. Hart noted something on her chart. "You have lost more weight. You are down to 98 pounds. It is hard to find time to eat with the baby. And those dark circles under your eyes suggest you are not sleeping much. Caleb still wakes up every 2 hours." Dr. Hart set down her clipboard. She looked at Emily for a long moment, and Emily felt something crack under that steady, knowing gaze. "May I examine your arm, Emily?" Emily hesitated, then held out her right arm. There was a bruise, 4 days old, shaped like fingers. "How did this happen?" Dr. Hart asked quietly. "I bumped into the counter," Emily lied. Dr. Hart's expression did not change, but something in her eyes sharpened. She closed the exam room door and sat down across from Emily. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you safe at home?" The question shattered every wall Emily had been building to hold herself together. She started crying. Not polite tears, ugly, desperate, soul-deep crying. "I do not know," Emily sobbed. "I do not think so. He pushed me once, but he said it was my fault, and maybe it was. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I really am crazy, like he says." Dr. Hart took both of Emily's hands in hers. Firm, grounding. "Stop," she said. "Listen to me. You are not crazy. What you just described is called gaslighting. And the push? That is assault. It does not matter how hard it was. Putting hands on you in anger is abuse." Emily's whole body shook. "But I have no money, no family, nowhere to go." Dr. Hart stood and went to her desk. She pulled out a card and pressed it into Emily's palm. "Manhattan Women's Crisis Center, 24-hour hotline. Call them today. They have resources, emergency housing, legal aid." Then Dr. Hart opened her wallet and pulled out $300 in cash. "Take this. Hide it somewhere he will never look. This is your emergency fund." Emily tried to refuse, but Dr. Hart insisted. 20 years ago, I was you," Dr. Hart said quietly. "My ex-husband isolated me, controlled me, told me I was crazy. By the time I left, I had nothing. A stranger gave me $100, and that $100 saved my life. Let me be that person for you." Emily clutched the money, sobbing. "Thank you." Dr. Hart's voice dropped even lower. "But Emily, you need to be smart about this. Men like your husband do not let go easily. If you are going to leave, you need to plan. Document everything. And do not let him know you are planning until you are already gone." That night, while Brandon was supposedly working late, Emily called the crisis hotline from the bathroom with the shower running to mask her voice. A counselor named Sarah talked her through safety planning for 90 minutes. Open a secret bank account. Store important documents somewhere outside the home. Pack a go bag with essentials for her and the baby. Document every incident of abuse. And most importantly, install a hidden camera. Emily ordered a nanny cam from Amazon the next day. She had it shipped to Dr. Hart's office instead of the apartment. When it arrived, she hid it inside a picture frame in the living room, positioned to capture the couch and kitchen area. Within 1 week, she had footage of Brandon screaming at her for being lazy. Brandon telling Sloan on the phone that Emily would be out of the picture soon. Brandon going through Emily's purse while she was in the shower, clearly looking for evidence that she was planning to leave. The camera captured everything. 1 week after that, Emily was in the hospital cafeteria, forcing herself to eat lunch, when a man approached her table. "Emily Morgan?" he asked. Emily looked up, instantly wary. Tall, early 40s, kind eyes, slight limp, scar on his left temple. "I am sorry. Do I know you?" He sat down without waiting for permission, but his demeanor was not threatening. "We met 2 years ago. You probably do not remember. I was unconscious for most of it." Emily frowned, trying to place him. "March 2021, car accident, collapsed lung. You were my trauma nurse. You stayed with me for 6 hours during surgery prep, kept me awake, kept me breathing. Doctor said if you had not, I would have died." Emily's memory clicked into place. The accident, the man who kept trying to fall asleep, a sign of brain bleeding. She had held his hand and talked to him about anything and everything just to keep him conscious. "Adam Crawford," he said, extending his hand. "I am a family law attorney now, specializing in domestic violence cases." Emily's heart skipped. "Why are you telling me this?" Adam's expression turned serious. "2 days ago, I saw your husband at the courthouse. He was with his attorney filing preliminary custody paperwork. I overheard them discussing strategy, how to paint you as mentally unfit." The blood drained from Emily's face. Adam continued, "I looked up the case, saw your name. The woman who saved my life is now in danger, and I happen to have the exact skill set to help her." He slid his business card across the table. "I work pro bono for domestic violence survivors. You saved my life. Let me save yours." Emily stared at the card, her hands trembling. "I have evidence, messages, documents, recordings, but I do not know what to do with it." Adam's eyes lit up. "Then we start building your case, today." They met at a coffee shop far from the penthouse 2 days later. Emily showed Adam everything on her secret cloud account. Every message between Brandon and Sloan, every forged document, every video of abuse, every audio recording. Adam went through it meticulously, taking detailed notes. When he finished, he looked up at Emily with something that might have been admiration. "Emily, this is gold. With this evidence, we can not only get you custody, we can get him investigated for fraud and domestic violence. These forged documents are crimes." For the first time in months, Emily felt something other than fear. She felt hope. "But," Adam warned, "we have to move very carefully. If Brandon suspects you are preparing to leave, he will accelerate his timeline. We need to stay ahead of him." Together, they developed a detailed plan. Emily would continue documenting for at least 30 more days. She would open a separate bank account in her maiden name. She would slowly move small amounts of money, $50 to $100 at a time, from their grocery budget. Not enough for Brandon to notice. She would prepare a go bag with clothes and supplies for her and Caleb, hidden at Dr. Hart's house. And most importantly, she would act completely normal. She could not let Brandon see any change in her behavior. "What if he finds out?" Emily asked, her voice shaking. Adam's expression was grim. "Then you call 911 immediately and get out." Because men like him, when they feel control slipping, they become dangerous. Over the next 6 weeks, Emily became a spy in her own home. She woke at 5 every morning before Brandon to check the hidden camera footage from overnight. She uploaded it to her cloud account and deleted it from the camera. She went back to bed before Brandon woke, so he never knew. During the day while Brandon was at work, Emily systematically photographed every financial document in his home office. Bank statements showing mysterious wire transfers, emails about the company's upcoming initial public offering, a second phone hidden in his desk drawer, the one he used to text Sloan. In the evenings, Emily pretended everything was fine. She made dinner. She smiled. She did not ask where Brandon had been. She played the role of the compliant wife. Brandon grew suspicious of her sudden cooperation. "Why are you being so nice?" he asked one night. Emily had practiced this response with Adam. "I talked to my doctor. She adjusted my medication. I am feeling better." Brandon seemed satisfied. He let his guard down. By mid-May, Emily had $2,400 saved in her secret account. She had 47 video recordings. She had over 200 screenshots of texts and emails. She had copies of all important documents. Caleb's birth certificate, social security card, medical records. She had a go-bag packed and hidden at Dr. Hart's house. She had arranged for a safe house in Oregon through the Crisis Center hotline. Adam had an ironclad custody petition ready to file the moment Emily was safe. Dr. Hart was on standby to provide testimony about the signs of abuse she had documented. Everything was perfect. On the night of May 28th, Emily put Caleb to bed and kissed his forehead. "Tomorrow, baby," she whispered. "Tomorrow we are free." She had a suitcase packed and hidden in the back of Caleb's closet. She had arranged for a car to pick her up at 7:15 in the morning. Brandon left for work at 7 o'clock every day, like clockwork. She would have exactly 15 minutes. Emily went to sleep that night feeling, for the first time in forever, like she was going to win. She had no way of knowing that in 3 hours her entire plan would come crashing down. At 10:47 that night, Emily was checking her mental list one final time when she heard the apartment door slam open with explosive force. Brandon stormed in. Not quietly, not carefully, furious. Emily sat up in bed, her heart instantly hammering. "Brandon? What happened?" He was in the bedroom in 3 strides. His face was flushed red, veins bulging in his neck. He held his phone, screen facing her. On it, a notification from their joint bank account. "Transfer to Morgan.E.Savings, $100. Emily's blood turned to ice. "What?" Brandon said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Is Morgan E. Savings?" Emily's mind raced desperately. She had been so careful. Small amounts, always spread out, always labeled as groceries or pharmacy purchases. But she had not known that Brandon had set up mobile alerts for every transaction over $50. "I opened a savings account," Emily stammered. "For Caleb. For his future." "Do not lie to me." Brandon threw his phone at the wall. It hit with a sickening crack, the screen shattering. He advanced toward the bed. Emily scrambled backward. "You think I am stupid?" he spit out. "I checked the account history. 17 transfers in 6 weeks, $2,400 total." He leaned in close, his breath hot on her face. "You are planning something." "I am not." "Where is the money, Emily?" "It is savings for emergencies." Brandon's eyes narrowed to slits. Then he turned and started tearing apart the bedroom like a man possessed. He ripped open her dresser drawers, throwing clothes everywhere. He pulled books off the shelves, checking for hidden documents. He checked under the mattress. Then he went to the closet. Time seemed to slow down as Brandon pulled out the suitcase Emily had hidden in the back corner. He set it on the bed and opened it. Inside, neatly packed, were Emily's clothes, Caleb's clothes, diapers, formula, everything needed to disappear. Brandon looked at the contents of the suitcase. Then he looked at Emily. His expression was no longer angry. It was cold, calculating, terrifying. "You were going to leave," he said softly. Emily could not speak, could not move, could barely breathe. Brandon pulled out a second phone from his pocket, the one Emily had photographed but could never access. He dialed a number. "Marcus," he said into the phone, his eyes never leaving Emily's face. "We need to move up the timeline. File the emergency custody petition tonight." "Yes, tonight." "She is attempting to flee with my son. I have the evidence." Emily lunged for the phone. "No, Brandon, please." He shoved her. Hard. She fell back onto the bed. "You want to play dirty?" Brandon's voice was ice. "Fine, Magda. Let us see how a judge feels about a mentally unstable mother trying to kidnap a baby in the middle of the night." He pulled out his phone and started taking photos. The suitcase, the go-bag. Then he did something that made Emily's blood run cold. He opened her bottles of postpartum depression medication, scattered some pills on the nightstand, and photographed them to make it look like she was overdosing or unstable. "You cannot do this," Emily sobbed. "I already did." Brandon pocketed his phone. "Court hearing tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock, emergency custody determination." He leaned down, whispered in her ear, "You lose, Emily. You always lose." He walked out of the bedroom. Emily heard him go into Caleb's room. She ran after him. Brandon stood over the crib, looking down at their sleeping son. "Say goodbye," he said quietly, "because after tomorrow, you will only see him through supervised visits, if you are lucky." Emily collapsed to her knees, hands pressed over her mouth to muffle the screams threatening to tear out of her throat. The next morning, May 29th at 9 o'clock, Emily stood in family court with no attorney. She had called Adam at 6 in the morning. His phone went straight to voicemail. She called the crisis center. All advocates were with other clients. She was alone. Brandon arrived with 3 attorneys and a leather briefcase full of manufactured evidence. The judge was Honorable Patricia Whitmore. Emily would not discover until much later that Judge Whitmore was Sloane's aunt. Brandon's attorney presented his case with practiced efficiency. Your Honor, my client has reason to believe his wife, Emily Hayes, is suffering from severe postpartum psychosis. Last night he discovered she had been secretly siphoning money, packing bags, and preparing to flee the state with their 7-month-old son without notifying the father. Emily tried to interrupt. That is not true. I was trying to protect us. He has been abusive. The judge cut her off. Mrs. Hayes, you will have your turn to speak. Do you have an attorney? No, Your Honor. I tried to reach him, but then I suggest you sit down and listen. Brandon's attorney presented the photos of the packed suitcase, bank records showing Emily's secret account, a forged psychological evaluation from a doctor Emily had never met, testimony from a paid actor pretending to be a concerned neighbor who claimed to hear Emily screaming at the baby, photos of Emily's medication bottles arranged to suggest instability. When it was finally Emily's turn, she tried to explain. Her voice cracked. She was crying. She had no physical documents because everything was on her cloud account, and she had not thought to print it. He is lying. He has been cheating on me for years. He is planning to frame me. I have evidence. Do you have this evidence with you? The judge asked. No, it is online. I can show you us. Mrs. Hayes, without physical documentation, I cannot consider hearsay. But he pushed me. He has been emotionally abusing me for months. Brandon's attorney cut in smoothly. Your Honor, my client has never been charged with any crime. Mrs. Hayes's accusations are unsubstantiated and frankly sound like the paranoid delusions of someone in mental crisis. The judge barely deliberated. She looked at Emily with what might have been pity or might have been contempt. Based on the evidence presented, I am issuing a temporary emergency custody order. Physical custody of the minor child, Caleb James Hayes, is granted to the father, Brandon Hayes, pending a full custody evaluation to be scheduled in 6 months. Emily's world shattered. No, you cannot do this. He is dangerous, please. Mrs. Hayes, you will have supervised visitation rights. 2 hours per week, supervised by a court-appointed social worker. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel slammed down. Emily screamed. Security had to physically remove her from the courtroom as she sobbed and begged and broke apart. Brandon watched his wife dragged away. His expression was neutral, victorious. Outside the courthouse, Emily collapsed on the concrete steps. She could not breathe, could not think. They had taken her baby. A social worker approached. Mrs. Hayes, your first supervised visit is scheduled for Friday at 2 in the afternoon. You will have 2 hours with your son at our facility. 2 hours per week. Emily vomited right there on the courthouse steps. When Emily tried to return to the penthouse that afternoon, she found Brandon had changed the locks. A notice was taped to the door. Per court order, you are not permitted to enter the marital residence while all custody is contested. Personal belongings will be released within 72 hours. Emily stood in the hallway with nothing but the clothes on her back and $14 in her wallet. Her secret bank account required identification to access, and her ID was locked inside the apartment. She called Dr. Hart. No answer. The doctor was in surgery. She tried Adam again. Voicemail. Emily sat on the curb outside her building and cried until a doorman she did not recognize told her to leave or he would call the police. She walked 23 blocks to Dr. Hart's house. It was 11 at night when she arrived, catatonic with shock and grief. Dr. Hart took one look at Emily's face and pulled her inside. He won, Emily whispered. He took everything. Dr. Hart's voice was firm despite her own exhaustion. He won a battle, not the war. The next day, Emily tried calling Adam 14 more times. Every call went to voicemail. On the third day, an unknown number called. Mrs. Hayes, this is Roosevelt Hospital. Adam Crawford was in a car accident 2 nights ago. He is in intensive care. You are listed as his emergency contact. Emily felt the floor drop out from under her. At the hospital, she learned Adam had been in a single car accident. He ran off the road into a concrete barrier. Multiple broken bones, fractured skull, barely alive. The investigating officer was sympathetic but skeptical. There were skid marks suggesting he swerved to avoid something, but no other cars were involved. It is strange. My husband did this, Emily said, her voice hollow. He is trying to kill anyone who helps me. The officer exchanged a look with the nurse. They thought Emily was hysterical, unstable, just like Brandon had said she was. Emily left before they could call psychiatric services. On Friday, June 1st, Emily arrived at the Family Services Center for her 2-hour supervised visit with Caleb. She had not seen her baby in 3 days, the longest they had ever been apart. A social worker named Janet brought Caleb to a small, sterile room. Emily sobbed when she saw him. She held him, kissed him, whispered apologies over and over. Janet sat in the corner with a clipboard, watching, taking notes. Emily tried to feed Caleb, but her hands were shaking so badly she dropped the bottle. Janet wrote something down. Emily tried to read him a story, but she was crying so hard she could not get through a sentence. Janet wrote something down. After exactly 2 hours, Janet took Caleb from Emily's arms. The baby started crying, reaching for his mother. Please, Emily begged, just 5 more minutes. I am sorry, Mrs. Hayes. Rules are rules. Emily watched through a window as Janet carried her screaming baby down the hallway, his small hands reaching back toward his mother. Emily collapsed against the wall, making sounds she did not know a human could make. For the next 3 days, Emily stayed in Dr. Hart's guest room. She did not speak, did not eat, just stared at a photo of Caleb on her phone. On the 4th day, Dr. Hart found Emily in the bathroom, a bottle of sleeping pills in her hand. Dr. Hart slapped the bottle away. No, you do not get to give up. He wants you to give up. That is how he wins. He already won, Emily said, her voice completely empty. Bullshit. Dr. Hart pulled Emily to her feet. Listen to me. I know this place. I lived here for 3 years after my ex took my daughter. But I survived. You will too. I have no evidence, no lawyer, no money, no baby. Dr. Hart's eyes flashed. You have me, and you have something else. She showed Emily a text on her phone from an unknown number. Dr. Hart, this is Evelyn Monroe. I work with domestic violence survivors. I heard about Emily Hayes' case. I can help. Meet me tomorrow. 441 West 57th Street, 10 in the morning. Emily looked up, confused and barely daring to hope. Who is Evelyn Monroe? Dr. Hart's smile was grim. A woman who makes monsters like Brandon disappear. 441 West 57th Street was a discreet office building with no sign, just a number. Dr. Hart and Emily took the elevator to the 7th floor in silence. Emily felt like she was moving through a dream, or maybe a nightmare she could not wake from. The office was simple: 1 desk, 2 chairs, and a woman who looked like she had seen everything the world could throw at someone and come out the other side stronger. Evelyn Monroe was in her late 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's soul. When she stood to shake Emily's hand, her grip was firm and warm. I have been following your case, Evelyn said without preamble. Your husband is sloppy. He thinks he is untouchable, but men like him always make mistakes. Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. He is not sloppy. He destroyed me. Evelyn's smile was cold as winter steel. He destroyed 1 battle. But Emily, I have taken down dozens of men like him. Abusers, manipulators, white-collar criminals who think they are above the law. She leaned forward, and I have never lost. Emily wanted desperately to believe her. I have no money to pay you. I do not want money, Evelyn said. I want justice, and I want to make sure Brandon Hayes never does this to another woman. Evelyn opened her laptop and turned it so Emily could see the screen. A file labeled Brandon Hayes Financial Investigation. I have been building a case against your husband's company for 6 months, Evelyn explained. They are under FBI investigation for medical research grant fraud. Brandon's company has been embezzling from federal grants $4.2 million over 3 years. They have been funneling money through shell corporations. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Your evidence. the documents you photographed. Those are the missing pieces of my investigation, Evelyn continued. With what you have, we can not only get your son back, we can put Brandon in federal prison. For the first time in days, Emily felt something stir in her chest that was not despair. So he is going to prison? If we play this exactly right, yes. Evelyn's expression turned serious. But Emily, we have to be smart. If we move too fast, he will destroy evidence. If we wait too long, he will finish destroying you. Over the next hour, Evelyn laid out a strategy with military precision. Emily would continue her supervised visits, showing the court she was stable and cooperative. Meanwhile, Evelyn's team would gather more financial evidence against Brandon's company. They would locate Sloan, who was apparently not just Brandon's mistress, but also the CFO of one of his shell corporations, meaning she was complicit in the embezzlement. And they would find Brandon's second phone, the one with all his messages to Sloan. But, Evelyn warned, Brandon will fight back. When men like him feel cornered, they become dangerous. Emily's jaw set with new determination. I do not care. I want my son. Evelyn nodded with approval. Then let us go to war. Over the next 40 days, Emily became methodical in a way she had never been before. Every supervised visit with Caleb, she took detailed notes. Was he clean, well-fed, happy? During their third week of visits, Emily noticed a bruise on Caleb's arm and reported it to Janet immediately. The social worker seemed surprised by Emily's calm competence. Meanwhile, Evelyn's team worked behind the scenes like shadows. A private investigator tracked Brandon's spending. $12,000 on a single dinner at Per Se with Sloan, charged to his company card. $35,000 for a weekend trip to Turks and Caicos. Sloan had tagged him on Instagram before making the post private, but the investigator had already taken screenshots. Wire transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Every financial crime, every lie, every piece of evidence. Evelyn's investigator befriended Brandon's assistant, a young woman named Tessa, who Brandon had been treating terribly for months. Tessa wanted revenge. She gave the investigator access to Brandon's office. They found the second phone hidden in a desk drawer. They cloned every piece of data from it, every text, every photo, every voice message between Brandon and Sloan. The evidence was devastating. Messages between Brandon and Sloan discussing the bribed judge. Sloan asking Brandon if the lawyer helping Emily would be a problem. Brandon replying that Marcus had handled it. Proof that Brandon had orchestrated Adam's so-called accident. 3 weeks into this process, Emily got a call from Roosevelt Hospital. Adam Crawford had woken from his coma. Emily visited him that same day. Adam was in a wheelchair, his left leg in a cast, his head still wrapped in bandages. But his eyes were clear and sharp. Emily, he said, his voice rough from weeks of intubation. Tell me you did not give up. I found help, Emily said. Someone named Evelyn Monroe. Adam's expression shifted to something like relief. Evelyn, good. She is the best in the business. If anyone can take Brandon down, it is her. I am so sorry this happened to you, Tsuono, Emily whispered. Adam shook his head. This is not your fault. This is what Brandon does. He destroys anyone who threatens his control. But Emily, we have him now. I saw the police report on my accident. They found paint transfer on my car. Black paint. From a car that forced me off the road. Brandon drives a black Mercedes, Emily said. Oish. Exactly. They are investigating. It is all coming together. By mid-July, Evelyn's team had built an ironclad case. Financial crimes, domestic abuse, witness tampering, attempted murder, judicial corruption. The net was closing around Brandon from all sides. Adam was out of the hospital now, recovered enough to practice law again. He filed a motion to overturn the custody order, citing new evidence. A new judge was assigned to the case. Judge Whitmore had been removed for ethics violations after an anonymous tip, likely from Evelyn, revealed her connection to Sloan. The custody hearing was scheduled for July 16th at 2 in the afternoon. Emily was nervous but hopeful. They had everything they needed to win. Brandon did not know what was coming. On the night of July 15th, Emily was staying at Dr. Hart's house. She went to bed at 10, sleeping soundly for the first time in months. At 1:47 in the morning, Dr. Hart's smoke alarm started screaming. Emily jolted awake. The guest room was filling with smoke. She could hear crackling flames. "Olivia!" Emily screamed. She ran into the hallway. Flames were climbing the walls near the kitchen. The front door was blocked by fire. Dr. Hart appeared from her bedroom, coughing. "Back door, now!" They ran through the burning house. Emily grabbed her laptop bag with all her evidence backed up in the cloud. The back door was jammed. Dr. Hart kicked it open with desperate strength. They stumbled into the backyard, coughing and covered in soot. Behind them, the house was engulfed in flames. Fire trucks arrived within minutes. Police, paramedics checked both women for smoke inhalation. A fire investigator examined the scene and approached them 20 minutes later. "This was arson," he said grimly. "Accelerant poured near the gas line, timed ignition device. Someone wanted this to look like an accident, but they were sloppy." "It was my husband," Emily said, her voice shaking. "Brandon Hayes." "Do you have evidence?" the investigator asked. "Check traffic cameras within a 2-block radius between 10 at night and 1 in the morning. Look for a black Mercedes S-Class." Emily recited Brandon's license plate number from memory. The investigator radioed his team. 30 minutes later, it was confirmed. Brandon's car had been spotted 3 blocks away at 12:47. He parked, walked toward Dr. Hart's house, and returned to his car 22 minutes later. Brandon was arrested at 4:18 that morning, charged with attempted murder, arson, and witness intimidation. But he posted $500,000 bail within 6 hours. By 11 in the morning, he was free again, and the custody hearing was still scheduled for 2 that afternoon. Meanwhile, that same morning, FBI agents showed up at Sloan Whitmore's office with a warrant and gave her a choice. "Ms. Whitmore, you have 2 options. Testify against Brandon Hayes and accept immunity, or face federal charges for embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder." Sloan's face went white. "Murder? I did not—" "Your text messages to Mr. Hayes show you were aware of his plans to handle anyone who helped his wife. That makes you an accessory." Sloan looked at the evidence laid out before her. Text messages she thought were deleted. Emails, wire transfers, years of crimes she had committed alongside Brandon. She realized Brandon had used her, and now she was going to prison unless she cooperated. She took the deal. At 2 o'clock on July 16th, Emily walked into family court with an army behind her. Adam Crawford in a wheelchair but present and sharp. Dr. Olivia Hart ready to testify despite having lost her home the night before. Evelyn Monroe coordinating an FBI raid on Brandon's company that was happening at that exact moment. And one more person that Brandon had not expected. Margaret Hayes, Brandon's mother. She was 68 years old with silver hair and an expression carved from stone. When Brandon saw her walk in behind Emily's legal team, his confidence visibly faltered for the first time. The new judge, Honorable Robert Martinez, was known for being fair but merciless with liars. He listened as Adam presented evidence that made even the court stenographer gasp. Evidence Part 1, Financial Crimes. Adam showed proof of embezzlement totaling $4.2 million. Shell corporations. Offshore accounts. Brandon's own text messages admitting to fraud. Evidence Part 2, Domestic Abuse. 47 video recordings of Brandon verbally and emotionally abusing Emily. Medical records documenting her injuries. Dr. Hart's testimony about recognizing the signs of trauma. Even Janet, the social worker, now testified that she had become concerned about Brandon's behavior during custody exchanges. He was impatient, dismissive of Caleb's needs, more interested in punishing Emily than caring for his son. Evidence Part 3, The Affair and Manipulation. Thousands of text messages between Brandon and Sloan. Proof that Brandon had married Emily purely as a business strategy. Photos of Brandon and Sloan together time-stamped to prove the affair predated the marriage, including one photo from the night Emily gave birth. Evidence Part 4, Attempted Murder. Traffic camera footage placing Brandon near Dr. Hart's house the night of the arson. The fire investigators' report confirming arson. Text messages where Brandon told Sloan that Adam Crawford would not be a problem anymore. Evidence Part 5, Judicial Corruption. Proof that Brandon had bribed Judge Whitmore. Bank transfers disguised as consulting fees. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of papers rustling and people shifting in shock. Even Brandon's attorneys looked sick. Then Adam said, "Your Honor, we have one more witness." Margaret Hayes took the stand. Brandon leaned toward his attorney and hissed, "What is she doing?" Margaret looked directly at the judge, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Your Honor, my name is Margaret Hayes. I am Brandon's mother, and I am here to tell you that my son is a monster. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. The judge slammed his gavel for order. Margaret continued, 20 years ago, Brandon was married before, to a woman named Caroline Porter. She died in a fall down the stairs in their home. The death was ruled accidental. Brandon had gone completely pale. But 3 months ago, Caroline's sister contacted me. She had been going through Caroline's belongings and found a journal, hidden, detailing months of abuse. Brandon told Caroline she was crazy, unstable, paranoid, the exact same words he used with Emily. Margaret pulled out photocopied pages from the journal and read aloud. He told me I am imagining things, but I am not. He is hiding money. He is seeing someone else. I tried to leave, and he said he would take our baby, and I would never see her again. I am so scared. Margaret's voice broke. The last entry was dated 2 days before Caroline died. Her death was never properly investigated. Brandon inherited everything, including sole custody of their daughter. A daughter he immediately gave to his sister to raise because he never wanted children. He only wanted control. She looked directly at Brandon with a mother's grief and a mother's steel. I stayed silent once. I will not stay silent again. My son is dangerous. He is manipulative, and he should never have custody of any child. Brandon stood up, shaking with rage. You lying! Judge Martinez slammed his gavel so hard it echoed like a gunshot. Mr. Hayes, sit down now or I will have you removed. Brandon's attorney physically pushed him back into his seat. The judge looked at the evidence spread before him, at Emily, thin and exhausted but holding herself together, at Caleb's photos and medical records, at the mountain of proof that Brandon Hayes was everything Margaret claimed and worse. Judge Martinez did not need to deliberate. His expression was one of pure disgust. Mr. Hayes, I am issuing an immediate order reversing custody. Full physical and legal custody of the minor child Caleb James Hayes is granted to Emily Hayes, effective immediately. Emily's knees buckled. Adam caught her arm, steadying her. The judge continued. Furthermore, you are hereby ordered to have zero contact with the minor child pending your criminal trial. Supervised visitation may be reconsidered in 5 years if you complete a batterer's intervention program and undergo psychological evaluation, which, given the charges you are facing, seems highly unlikely. Brandon was on his feet again. You cannot, I can and I have. Bailiff, please escort Mr. Hayes from my courtroom. As security grabbed Brandon's arms, he started screaming, Emily, you ruined my life. You ruined everything. Emily looked at him, tears streaming down her face, and said quietly, No, Brandon, you ruined your own life. I just made sure everyone else could see it. Brandon was dragged from the courtroom, still screaming threats and curses. 30 minutes later, Emily was brought to a private room where a social worker waited with Caleb. She had not held her baby in 6 weeks. The social worker placed Caleb in Emily's arms. He was bigger. He had changed. But he knew her. He reached up with his small hand and touched her face. And he smiled. Emily collapsed, sobbing, holding him, rocking him. I am so sorry, baby. Mommy is here now. I am never leaving you again. Never. The next day, Evelyn Monroe organized a press conference on the courthouse steps. Emily stood with Caleb in her arms, flanked by Adam, Dr. Hart, and Evelyn. Reporters swarmed with cameras and microphones. Emily read from a prepared statement, her voice shaking but growing stronger with each word. My name is Emily Hayes. For 2 years, I was trapped in an abusive marriage. My husband isolated me, manipulated me, told me I was crazy. He tried to take my child. He tried to kill the people who helped me. She paused, looking down at Caleb, then back at the cameras. But I survived, and I want every woman watching this to know you are not crazy, you are not alone, and you can escape. She listed resources, hotline numbers, shelter organizations, legal aid groups. Document everything, find allies, build your case, and when the time is right, fight. Fight for yourself, fight for your children. Fight because you deserve better. The video went viral within hours. 12 million views in 48 hours. The hashtag Justice for Emily trended worldwide. Over the next months, Brandon's life collapsed completely. July 18th, the FBI raided his company. He was arrested on federal charges. July 20th, all his assets were frozen. July 25th, the board of directors fired him. August 1st, the company's initial public offering was canceled. September 15th, Sloan Whitmore testified against him in federal court, detailing years of fraud and manipulation. October 3rd, Brandon Hayes was convicted on 11 counts: embezzlement, money laundering, witness tampering, attempted murder, arson, domestic abuse. October 10th, sentencing. 18 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole. Sloan got 8 years for her cooperation. She lost her business license and was barred from serving on any corporate board. In prison, she wrote Emily a letter. Emily burned it without reading a single word. Adam Crawford made a full recovery. He opened a legal clinic specifically for domestic violence survivors. Emily served on the board. Dr. Olivia Hart rebuilt her house with insurance money. Her estranged daughter, who she had lost in her own custody battle 20 years earlier, saw Emily's story on the news and reached out. Mother and daughter reunited after 2 decades apart. Evelyn Monroe's investigation led to 47 additional arrests in Brandon's corporate network. She was featured on 60 Minutes for her work helping abuse survivors. The FBI offered her a consultant position, which she accepted. And Emily slowly rebuilt her life, one day at a time. 2 years later, September 2025, Emily stood in a small coffee shop in Portland, Oregon. She had moved across the country after the trial, needing a fresh start far from the city where she had nearly been destroyed. Caleb, now 3 years old, sat at a nearby table coloring and eating a chocolate chip cookie. His laugh filled the space, bright and carefree. He had no memory of his father, no memory of those dark early months. He only knew safety and love, and a mother who would move heaven and earth to protect him. Emily was meeting with a young woman, mid-20s, with a bruised arm poorly hidden under a cardigan and eyes that darted nervously toward the door every few minutes. "I saw your story," the woman whispered. "On the news. I need help. My boyfriend, he says I am crazy. He controls all the money. He says if I leave, he will tell everyone I am a bad mother." Emily reached across the table and took the woman's hand. "You are not crazy," Emily said firmly. "I hear you. I believe you. And I am going to help you get out. But first, we need to document everything. Do you have a safe place to keep evidence?" The woman shook her head, tears starting to fall. "Okay," Emily said gently. "We will set up a secret email account. We will take photos. We will record conversations. We will build your case piece by piece until you are ready to leave." This was Emily's life now, her new career, her purpose. After the trial, Evelyn Monroe had offered Emily a position with her organization, full-time victim advocate. Emily helped women escape abusive relationships, navigate the legal system, rebuild their lives. In 2 years, she had helped 15 women and their children get to safety. 15 lives saved. 15 futures reclaimed. Sometimes the women won full custody like Emily had. Sometimes they had to settle for shared custody with supervised exchanges. Sometimes they lost the first battle, but won the war eventually. Every case was different, but Emily showed up for each one, bearing witness to their pain and their strength, because she understood. She had been there. She had survived, and she could help others do the same. Emily's personal life had slowly begun to heal too. She had bought a small house in a quiet Portland neighborhood. 2 bedrooms, a yard where Caleb could play, a garden where Emily planted tomatoes and basil and flowers that bloomed in the summer. She was in therapy, working through the trauma. She still had nightmares sometimes. She still flinched when someone raised their voice. She still had moments when she could not believe she had survived. But those moments were becoming less frequent. The nightmares were fading. The flinching was easing. She was healing. Adam visited every few months. They had dinner. They talked about cases. They laughed about Caleb's latest antics. There was something between them, something that might become romantic someday. But for now, they were friends, and that was enough. Dr. Olivia called every Sunday. They talked about medicine and motherhood and survival. Olivia's relationship with her daughter was still healing, still rebuilding, but they were trying, and trying was everything. Evelyn checked in weekly. She was like a fierce, protective fairy godmother. She sent care packages for Caleb. She remembered Emily's birthday. She made sure Emily knew she was not alone. As for Brandon, he was in a federal prison in Pennsylvania. Emily had not thought about him in months. She did not check on his status. She did not wonder how he was doing. He was in the past, a chapter closed, a monster caged. That was all she needed to know. On this particular September afternoon, after Emily finished meeting with the young woman and giving her resources and hope, Emily collected Caleb from his table, covered in crayon drawings. "Ready to go to the park, baby?" Emily asked. "Yes, swings," Caleb shouted, bouncing with 3-year-old energy. They walked hand in hand to the nearby park. Caleb ran to the playground equipment, climbing and sliding and laughing. Emily sat on a bench watching him, her heart so full it almost hurt. Her phone buzzed with a text from Adam. "Just won the Rodriguez case. Full custody to mom. Abuser gets supervised visits only. Another win." Emily texted back, "That is 23 wins this year. We are getting good at this." Adam replied, "We did not do anything. They saved themselves. We just showed them how." Emily looked up at Caleb. He was at the top of the slide, waving enthusiastically. "Mommy, watch me." Emily waved back, smiling. "I am watching, baby. You are so brave." Caleb went down the slide, laughing the whole way. At the bottom, he jumped up and ran back to do it again. Emily felt a wave of pure gratitude wash over her. Gratitude for Dr. Hart, who saw the signs. For Adam, who offered help. For Evelyn, who fought beside her. For every person who had believed her when Brandon tried to make the world think she was crazy. But mostly, Emily felt gratitude for herself. For the woman she had been, who refused to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. For the mother who had fought like hell to save her son. For the survivor who had looked at a monster and said no more. She had paid a terrible price for her freedom. 2 years of abuse, months of terror, the trauma that would follow her for the rest of her life. But she had also gained something precious, the knowledge that she was stronger than she ever knew, that she could survive anything, that she could help others to survive too. People sometimes asked Emily if she regretted marrying Brandon, if she regretted the pain and the fear and the fight. And Emily always gave them the same answer. "How could I regret the journey that gave me him?" She would look at Caleb, at his bright eyes and easy smile. "Yes, I paid a terrible price, but I would pay it again, because my son is safe, I am free, and that monster is in a cage where he belongs." That was not a happy ending, Emily would explain. It was not a sad ending either. It was just the truth. And the truth was this. She still had nightmares about Brandon finding her. She still had days when the trauma felt like it would swallow her whole. She still sometimes wondered if she would ever fully heal. But she was trying. She was building a life. She was helping others. She was raising her son to be kind and strong and to never, ever accept cruelty as love. That was not a fairy tale ending. That was real life, messy and painful and complicated. And it was worth fighting for. As the sun started to set over Portland, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Emily called to Caleb. "Time to go home, baby. We need to make dinner." Caleb ran over and threw his arms around her legs. "Love you, Mommy." Emily picked him up, holding him close. "I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything in the world." They walked home together through the quiet streets of their safe neighborhood. Behind them, the sun set on another day of freedom, another day of peace. And in a federal prison in Pennsylvania, Brandon Hayes sat alone in his cell, staring at gray walls, living with the consequences of his own cruelty. 3 years after Emily escaped Brandon's control, life had settled into a rhythm she had once thought impossible. Caleb was 4 years old now, starting preschool, making friends, living the childhood every child deserved, a childhood free from fear. Emily had been promoted to Director of Advocacy at Evelyn's organization. She oversaw a team of 6 advocates now, all survivors themselves, all dedicated to helping other women escape. The work was hard. Some nights, Emily came home emotionally exhausted, carrying the weight of other women's stories alongside her own. But it was also deeply meaningful. Every woman who escaped, every child who found safety, every life that was rebuilt from the ashes of abuse. It all mattered. It all meant something. On a Tuesday morning in November, Emily received a call from an unfamiliar number. She almost did not answer. but something made her pick up. "Hello? Emily Hayes?" A man's voice, official sounding. "Speaking. This is Detective James Morrison from the Pennsylvania State Police. I am calling regarding Brandon Hayes." Emily's heart stopped. For a moment, she was transported back to that apartment, that courtroom, that life she had barely escaped. "What about him?" she managed to ask. "Mr. Hayes was found dead in his cell this morning. It appears to be suicide. I am required to notify his next of kin. His mother listed you as the mother of his child." Emily sat down heavily. She felt nothing. No grief, no relief, just a strange emptiness. "I understand," she said quietly. "Thank you for letting me know. There will need to be arrangements made for the body. His mother is elderly and unable to travel. If you could—" "No," Emily said firmly. "I cannot. Contact his sister. I am not involved in his life anymore." "I see, I understand. I am sorry for your loss." Emily almost laughed at that. Loss? This was not loss. This was the final ending of a nightmare. She hung up and sat staring at the wall for several minutes. Then she called Adam. "Brandon is dead," she said when he answered. "Suicide." There was a long pause. Then Adam said carefully, "How are you feeling?" "I do not know," Emily admitted. "I thought I would feel something. Relief maybe, or closure, but I just feel empty." "That is normal," Adam said. "He was the father of your child. Even if he was a monster, that still means something complicated." "Should I tell Caleb?" Emily asked. "Maybe someday," Adam said, "when he is old enough to understand. But not now, he is 4. He does not need to carry this." Emily agreed. Caleb did not need to know about his father. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some truths could wait. She did not go to any funeral. She did not claim the body. Brandon's sister handled everything, and Emily never asked for details. In the following weeks, Emily waited for some kind of emotional reaction, but it never came. She had already grieved the loss of the man she thought Brandon was, the man who had courted her with flowers and promises. That man had never existed. So there was nothing left to mourn. Instead, Emily focused on her work and her son. She focused on the life she had built. One evening, as she was putting Caleb to bed, he looked up at her with serious eyes. "Mommy, why do not I have a daddy like other kids?" Emily's heart clenched. She had known this question would come out eventually. She had prepared for it. "Some families have a mommy and a daddy," Emily said gently. "Some have just a mommy. Some have just a daddy. Some have 2 mommies or 2 daddies. Families come in all different shapes. Our family is just you and me, and that is perfect." "But did I used to have a daddy?" Caleb persisted with the relentless logic of a 4-year-old. Emily took a breath. "You did, but he was not a good person. He was not safe. So it is just you and me now. And I promise you, baby, I love you enough for a whole army of parents." Caleb seemed satisfied with that answer. He snuggled into his pillow. "I love you too, Mommy. You are the best." Emily kissed his forehead and turned on his nightlight. As she left the room, she felt the weight of that conversation settle over her. Someday Caleb would have more questions. Someday she would have to tell him the full truth about his father. But not today. Today he was still young and innocent, and Emily would protect that innocence for as long as she possibly could. That night, unable to sleep, Emily sat on her back porch with a cup of tea and looked up at the stars. She thought about the woman she had been 5 years ago, the lonely nurse who had believed in fairy tales, who had ignored red flags because she wanted so desperately to not be alone. She thought about the woman she had become during her marriage, exhausted, manipulated, gaslit into believing she was crazy. And she thought about the woman she was now, strong, clear-eyed, healed enough to help others heal. It had been a long journey, and it was not over. Healing was not a destination. It was a process that continued every single day. But Emily was proud of herself, proud of fighting, proud of surviving, proud of building a life worth living. Her phone buzzed, a text from one of her clients, a woman named Sarah who Emily had been working with for 3 months. "I did it. I left. I am at the shelter. Thank you for believing in me." Emily smiled through sudden tears. Another woman free, another life saved. She texted back, "You did this. You are brave. You are strong. Call me tomorrow and we will plan next steps." This was why she did the work. This was why it all mattered. Not just her own survival, but helping others survive too. Emily thought about everything she had learned in the past 5 years, about red flags and gaslighting, about documentation and evidence, about the importance of allies and community, about the strength it took to leave and the courage it took to rebuild. And she thought about what she would tell her younger self if she could go back in time. Trust your instincts. Document everything. Find allies. Build your evidence. And when the time is right, fight like your life depends on it, because it does. She would also tell herself this. You will survive. It will be hard. It will be painful. There will be days when you do not think you can go on. But you will. You will survive. You will rebuild. You will help others. You will create something beautiful from the ashes of something terrible, and your son will grow up safe and loved and happy. That is all that matters. Emily finished her tea and went back inside. She checked on Caleb one more time. He was sleeping peacefully, his little chest rising and falling, his face relaxed and content. This was everything. This moment, this peace, this safety. Everything she had fought for, everything she had survived, and it was worth it. Every single moment of pain had been worth it for this. 5 years after Emily left Brandon, she stood at a podium in front of 200 domestic violence advocates at a national conference in Washington, D.C. Her palms were sweaty. Public speaking still made her nervous, even after doing it dozens of times. But this story needed to be told. And Emily had learned that her voice mattered. My name is Emily Hayes, she began, and 9 years ago, I met a man who nearly destroyed me. The room was silent. 200 people leaned forward, listening. Emily told her story. Not all of it, just the broad strokes, the manipulation, the isolation, the abuse, the fight for custody, the evidence that saved her life, the allies who made the difference. I am standing here today because 3 people refused to look away, Emily said. A pediatrician who recognized the signs of abuse, a lawyer who remembered I had saved his life and wanted to return the favor, and a former FBI agent who dedicated her life to taking down men who think they are above the law. She paused, making eye contact with people in the audience. But I am also standing here because I refused to give up, even when everything seemed hopeless, even when I had lost my child and my home and everything I thought mattered. I kept fighting. Her voice grew stronger, and that is what I want you to remember. Your clients, the survivors you are helping, they have that same strength inside them. Your job is not to save them. They will save themselves. Your job is to give them the tools and the support to do it. When Emily finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. People stood. Some were crying. Dozens of advocates approached her. They had questions about documentation strategies, about working with law enforcement, about supporting clients through custody battles. Emily answered every question patiently. This was her mission now, not just helping individual survivors, but training other advocates to help even more people. That evening, Emily had dinner with Adam, Evelyn, and Dr. Hart. The 4 of them met up several times a year, a found family forged in the fire of Emily's survival. To Emily, Adam said, raising his glass, for turning her pain into purpose. To all survivors, Emily corrected, raising her own glass. We are all in this together. They clinked glasses and talked late into the night about cases and victories and the work still to be done. The next morning, Emily flew back to Portland. Caleb, now 6 years old, was staying with Emily's neighbor, a retired teacher who loved babysitting him. When Emily walked through her front door, Caleb launched himself at her. Mommy, you are home. Emily scooped him up, even though he was getting too big for this. I missed you, baby. Did you have fun with Mrs. Patterson? Yes, we made cookies, and I drew you a picture. Caleb showed her a crayon drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. This is you and me, he explained. We are happy. Emily felt tears prick her eyes. We are happy, are we not? The happiest, Caleb confirmed with absolute certainty. That night, after Caleb was asleep, Emily sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and her laptop. She had been working on something for months now. A book, her story, but also a guidebook for other survivors. How to recognize abuse, how to document safely, how to build a case, how to leave, how to survive, how to rebuild. She wanted to put everything she had learned into a resource that would help people she would never meet, people who were where she had been, trapped, scared, believing they were crazy. Emily opened her laptop and read through what she had written so far. Chapter titles jumped out at her. Chapter 1, Recognizing the Red Flags I Missed. Chapter 2, When Love Becomes Control. Chapter 3, The Gaslighting Toolkit. Chapter 4, Documenting Abuse Safely. Chapter 5, Building Your Case. Chapter 6, Finding Allies in Dark Places. Chapter 7, The Day You Leave. Chapter 8, Surviving the Custody Battle. Chapter 9, Rebuilding from Nothing. Chapter 10, From Victim to Survivor to Advocate. She still had so much to write, but it was coming together. Her literary agent thought she could sell it to a major publisher. The book could reach thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Emily added a few more paragraphs to Chapter 9 and then closed the laptop. It was late. She was tired. But it was a good tired, the tired that came from meaningful work. She went to check on Caleb one last time before bed. He was sprawled across his twin bed, one arm hanging off the side, his favorite stuffed dinosaur clutched in the other hand. He looked so peaceful, so safe. Emily stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching him breathe. This was what she had fought for. This moment right here. Her son sleeping safely in a home filled with love instead of fear. As Emily got ready for bed, she caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. She looked different from the woman she had been 9 years ago. Older, yes, but also stronger. The lines around her eyes were not just from stress now, they were also from laughter, from smiling, from living. She had survived Brandon Hayes. She had beaten him at his own game. And she had built something beautiful from the wreckage he left behind. That was her legacy, not the pain she had endured, but what she had created in spite of it. A son who knew only love, a career helping others, a life worth living. Emily turned off the bathroom light and climbed into bed. Tomorrow she had 3 client meetings, a conference call with Evelyn about a potential new program, a therapy appointment, pickup from school for Caleb, soccer practice, dinner, bedtime stories, the beautiful mundane routine of a normal life, a life she had fought like hell to create. Emily closed her eyes and fell asleep quickly, dreamlessly. The nightmares that used to plague her had faded to occasional shadows. She was healing. Every day, a little bit more. And somewhere in federal prison records, marked with a death certificate, Brandon Hayes existed only as a cautionary tale, a reminder that cruelty might win battles, but it never wins the war. Because survivors like Emily, they were not just victims of abuse, they were warriors who had stared into darkness and refused to let it consume them. They were phoenixes who had risen from ashes. They were proof that love, real love, the kind that a mother has for her child, was stronger than hate could ever be. Emily Hayes had survived. She had rebuilt. She was helping others do the same. And that was not just a happy ending. That was everything. On Caleb's 10th birthday, Emily took him to the ocean for the first time. They had moved to a coastal town in Washington state, drawn by the beauty and the sense of starting fresh yet again. Caleb ran into the waves, laughing, completely unafraid. Emily watched from the beach, her heart full. Adam was there too. They had been dating for a year now, taking things slowly, building trust. He was good with Caleb, patient, kind. Everything Brandon had never been. "You did good, Em," Adam said quietly, standing beside her. "We did good," Emily corrected. "I could not have done any of this alone." "Maybe not," Adam agreed. "But you were the one who fought. You were the one who survived." Emily smiled. "We all did. Every single one of us. Every survivor. We all fought. We all survived." She thought about the hundreds of women she had helped over the years. Some she had lost touch with. Some still sent her Christmas cards. Some had gone on to become advocates themselves, paying forward the help they had received. Every single one of them was a warrior. Every single one of them was proof that abuse does not have to be a life sentence. "Mommy," Caleb shouted from the waves, "come in. The water is amazing." Emily laughed and kicked off her shoes. She ran toward the ocean, toward her son, toward the life they had built together. The water was cold, the waves were strong, but Emily was not afraid anymore. She had survived much worse than cold water. She had survived Brandon Hayes. And in surviving, She had learned the most important truth of all. She was stronger than she ever knew, braver than she ever imagined, and worthy of a life filled with awe and peace and love. That was not just her story. That was the story of every survivor who had ever fought their way out of darkness. And it was a story worth telling, again and again, until every person who needed to hear it understood. You can escape. You can survive. You can rebuild. You are not crazy. You are not alone. You are strong, and you deserve better. Always remember that. You deserve better.